Welcome, everyone who has joined us today for our webinar, Hope and Uncertainty, the Israel-Hamas Hostage and Ceasefire Agreement. My name is Sarah Freedman-Eder, and I am the Vice President for Israel and Jewish Affairs at the JCRC. JCRC is a proud partner of UJA Federation of New York, and we serve as the primary community relations agency in New York for the Jewish community. We thank our partners at UJA for their generous support and for joining us today. JCRC's mission is to build relationships with our city's key leaders to advance the values, interests, and security of New York's Jewish community and to build a more interconnected New York. A major part of our work is sharing our connection to Israel with all of New York's leaders and helping them to understand the challenges that our families and friends face in Israel and as they search for an end to the conflicts. For over 30 years, we've brought delegations of public officials, faith leaders, community partners, and campus administrators to Israel to experience the country firsthand. Today's webinar is part of our efforts to provide additional information to our Israel Study Tour alumni, as well as our many other community members who have joined us here today. As you all know, three precious souls, Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher, and Romy Gonen, were the first Israeli citizens to come home as part of this new ceasefire agreement. We are honored today to have retired IDF Colonel Miri Eisin with us to discuss the details of the agreement, how it has been received by both Israelis and Palestinians, and what we might expect moving forward in uncertain times. I'm just going to give a little bit of background about our speaker today, and then we will begin. Miri served in the Israeli intelligence community and retired from active duty at the rank of full colonel in 2004. Over her 20-year career in the military, she served as the deputy head of the Combat Intelligence Corps, the personal assistant to the director of military intelligence, and as the intelligence officer in combat units and research departments. After retiring from the military, Miri served as the Israeli Prime Minister's international media advisor from the Second Lebanon War until the end of 2007. Over the last 10 years, Miri has been one of Israel's main presenters speaking on regional geopolitics and security-related issues in the media worldwide. She teaches at Reichman University in Herzliya and works extensively with the media, student groups, and diplomats. Most importantly, she frequently joins our JCRC delegations in Israel, especially post-October 7th. If we have time after our discussion with Miri, we'd like to open it up to Q&A from the audience. Please enter all questions in the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom, and we will get to as many as possible. Miri, I want to thank you for making the time, especially as it is late at night in Israel, to speak with us today.
It's absolutely my honor and pleasure, and it's actually a good time, nice and quiet in Israel.
Nice and quiet for a change. Let's hope that it stays that way. Just to get started, let's begin with understanding the agreement itself. Could you talk us through the key elements? What exactly has been agreed to?
So today is January 21st, and I say that because yesterday, January 20th, Inauguration Day, and the fact that pretty much parallel to inauguration yesterday, the day before that, on January 19th, was the first stage of 3 stages of an agreement. So let's put it in the following way. The first stage is 42 days long. Everybody thinks that that's the whole thing. That's just the first stage. During those 42 days, the most important part that everybody talks about is the ceasefire. I'm Israeli. The reason there's the ceasefire is to be able to get back the hostages. So the 42 days are to get back 33 hostages. The name of those 33 hostages, the first 3 women who came back on Sunday, and we're all still trying to breathe after that event, those first 3 women are 3 out of the 33. It's a list of names that Israel gave Hamas, not that Hamas gave Israel. And I want to clarify that for everybody. Hamas have still not said, not only on the 33, but on all of the 94, they have never said a live, dead situation. Israel has declared over 30 of the 94 hostages dead, but that's Israel that declared. It's not that the Hamas has told us. So stage number 1 is over 42 days of a ceasefire to let out 33 people. The 33 people, and I again breathe in deep, from the beginning it was said, alive or dead. And I say that because we all need to understand that in these 42 days of the first stage, and within these first 33 names, I don't believe everybody will come back alive. And I need people to understand that, because we as if feel it's the 33 alive. No, that's not what Hamas said. And Israel has been very careful in the wording. The 33 itself are all of the women that have been held, the babies, the children, the B-bus babies, and in addition, men over 50 and other people who are injured or ill. But again, it's set up front, alive or dead. That's stage one. Assuming we get through now just to get through for a moment, Sarah, people don't realize that the three names of Romy, Doron, and Emily were only given literally, like several hours before they were brought out. The next stage is supposed to be this Saturday, and we won't know the names of who that is, and it's 3 at a time. And we won't know the names until a little before, and certainly the families. But in addition to that, parallel to letting out the hostages in the heart of Gaza and handing them over to the International Red Cross that then brings them to Israel, Israel is letting out a large amount of Palestinian prisoners and detainees. The prisoners are all people who have been put on full trial, found guilty, put in jail for a variety of different time periods. And a lot of the detainees from this war, most of them have not yet been put on trial because it's been during the war. Is that enough about stage one? Because that's just stage one. Okay. Stage two is assuming we've gotten through stage one. There's more portion in stage one during those 42 days as this exchange goes on. The Israeli Defense Forces, are supposed to realign, redeploy in 2 main areas. We're supposed to leave portions of the Nitzarim corridor. That's the one that kind of bisects the Gaza Strip, the north section from the south section. And what that enables is people that were told by Israel to go to the south at the beginning of the war as part of the war effort will be allowed to come back north. That's supposed to happen during the 42 days, this initial stage of the first 42 days. And after 2 to 3 exchanges, and it's never been said in a clear-cut way, but all within the 42 days, the Israeli forces are supposed to redeploy out of the main centers of cities that we're still in different portions, but it has not been said exactly where and how. Those are all things that are still in motion. All of that is stage one. Assuming it goes through, that means 42 days of a ceasefire, 33 release of hostages. The 33 hostages will give, I'm giving a ballpark number for those 33, in and around 1,000 to 1,200 Palestinian detainees and prisoners, and even more. That's just for those first 42 days. The redeployment of the Israeli forces, and from day 16, and we're only on day 3, we're supposed to be negotiating with the Hamas stage 2. Was that too much information?
No, I think this was really clear, and it's important to understand that everything that we're talking about now is this first stage.
And it's the first stage, which doesn't include all of the live hostages. Israel is declared dead. Out of the 94 that are there, Israel is declared dead 34. Again, that doesn't mean that there aren't more dead, which is a horrible thing to have to say, but we need to be aware of that. But it means up front, 33, that there are at least another, and it's mostly the young men who are being held and continuing to being held.
And so does that mean we do not yet know what the outline of a second stage would be, or we have a general sense of what a second stage would include?
So what was said about the second stage, because they're only supposed to really start negotiating the details, and I've said this too much in the media, but I'm going to say it again to our audience, the devil is in the details, and we are negotiating with the devil. This is not just a little easy thing, because these negotiations take a very long time and are very challenging. In the second stage, it's supposed to be release of a very large number of detainees and prisoners, because you're talking about the young men, and the way that Hamas have put the exchange rate. And what a horrible way of putting that. But it's the Hamas way of looking at them as a bargaining chip. The way they put the exchange rate from the beginning is that for a woman soldier, 50 Palestinian prisoners for one woman soldier, for others, 30 for one. And when it comes to the men soldiers, they've already said it's like 75 for one, and it's going to be even more heavy-duty terrorists than ones that we've already understood are going to be released at this stage. So that has not yet been negotiated, meaning not the exact quota, not the way that would be done, but all of that would be under the auspices of a ceasefire. It's not the end of the war, it's a ceasefire. The only way it continues is if we, Israel, cease in any way our attacks against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And all of that still to be negotiated. And only at stage 3, because it wasn't said how long that is, only in stage 3 would they give back the dead bodies that we know of. And in that sense, just right before this all happened on Saturday, in an Israeli military operation, they brought back one of the declared dead bodies, who was actually a soldier from 2014. And he was buried yesterday in Israel. He was killed and kidnapped in an operation in 2014 and taken as a dead body and held there for the last 10 years.
Thank you for that background. And could you explain, how did this deal come together after months? I mean, it's been 15 months. How was this the time that a deal was finally agreed to?
So there's more than one moving part. I, for a moment, want for all of the audience to focus, because everybody understands that there is politics involved. There's politics in everything, but we're talking about Israel, the state of Israel, the representatives of the state of Israel, negotiate with Hamas, the terror organization. I mean, I'm saying that up front because in the United States, declaratively, the United States does not negotiate with terrorist organizations. Okay? And I say that because it's a really big difference. Neither does the United Kingdom. Meaning you're taken hostage, they won't negotiate. And I'm not saying they do at the end or don't, but Israel does. And we have many times in the past. It's part of our own ethics and morals. It has to do with having compulsory service, let alone the fact that here civilians were taken from their homes, from their beds. And so you're negotiating with Hamas. You don't do it directly. So when you say, why does it take so long? No Israeli ever directly meets a Hamas representative. It means that Israel is talking to somebody. The somebody is talking to Hamas. Already just think of stupid games that we play when we say things in one ear and pass it on, and how perverted it gets. Because negotiators tend to be, they want it to go forward. And there can be a lot of misinformation, disinformation, and we're in a war right now. So when we talk about the amount of months, the details themselves, you have to, the first thing that we've wanted for 15 months, the entire time, including now, can you tell us who's there? Can you tell us what their condition is? They've never said that. So that's a point where you go, even when you don't know that, you're still negotiating. You have to understand what a difficult situation that is. So you're negotiating and you're saying, okay, so I'm going to let out, but only after you let out. And then it becomes the devil in the details on how do you do that situation where they only tell us a little bit before, and then they only bring them to some place, and the International Red Cross has to meet them, and we need to make sure that they get out. These are all details that are discussed, and all of them through middle people. So it takes a very, very long time to do every single stage along the way inside Israel as a country. And I say it as a democracy, and I know we tout the word all of the time, but all of these different decisions have to be made by judiciary. You actually have to have the correct people who know how to sign, because we're letting out prisoners, convicted prisoners who have 5 lifetime sentences. Somebody has to, you have to do all of these different things of how you both decide who yes, who no. In Israel, you have to publish the list of all of the prisoners that are going to be released, so that us citizens can go and say, no, we don't want that to happen. It's like all of these due diligence aspects that are in the background as well. So in all of the months themselves, there were months where there were no negotiations at all. Hamas wouldn't come. We wouldn't come in the conditions that they were defining. Now, just to remind everybody up front, Hamas said, we will give back the hostages when Israel doesn't stop fighting, ceasefire, when Israel leaves all of the Gaza Strip. That was the demand for many months. You asked what changed? I would say a series of things changed. I don't want to apologize. I'm being very Israeli right now. We killed Mohammed Def. We killed Yahya Sinwar. We degraded it's not defeat, it's not the military terms, but we heavily degraded not just the Hamas military capability, but the Hezbollah military capability. Everybody's like looking at this as being about the Gaza Strip and about Hamas, but it isn't just about that. Because when Hezbollah signed a ceasefire at the end of November, that changed what Hamas was willing to do. So I would say that the three main elements are Mohammed Def, who was essentially the chief of staff, Yahya Sinwar. At this stage, we all know his, I'm going to say, vilified name, and then the degrading and of Hezbollah and that ceasefire are the process which allowed you to get to the details to be able to try and get into this. And so many voices say it could have happened last year. It could have happened at different times. And I'm like, first of all, you can always say that it's never going to be a deal that we're comfortable with. But there were things that changed in the last few months that did bring both us and the other side to a place where, even though this is very hard to swallow, it isn't. It's like you see them come home. I can swallow that, but we're all going to talk about what the price is because there's a price. This is not an easy thing.
You mentioned this game of telephone where different actors are speaking to different people. They're never in direct conversation. Could you talk a little bit about the different international players involved in the negotiations, who played what role apart from Israel and Hamas?
So initially, it's going to be, you kind of think that there's these Israelis who go and they're the ones who are meeting Hamas. We're at war with Hamas. We're not meeting Hamas. And there are Israelis who have different connections with different Hamas leaders, people who are both within, dialogue of different types, but they're also going to be side players. They're not in the room. The Israeli military and security establishment, that's both the government, the military security establishment, are first and foremost going to talk to Egyptian military security establishment, because the Egyptians have a border with the Gaza Strip. It's one of the routes that they're smuggling in and out of. So they're going to be one of the stakeholders. So you're not talking to the politicians, you're talking to the security apparatus. Second ones that have been there from the beginning pretty much are the Qataris. But there's actually been, sometimes we were talking more with Egypt and sometimes we were talking more with Qatar. And that's also part of the thing. You have to trust to a certain degree. I don't like the word trust in anything that's going on. You actually have to arrive at an agreement with total lack of trust, but you want to trust the negotiators. So if it's Qatar, who is Qatar playing for? Are they more on the Hamas side? Are they more impacted by the United States? So with Qatar, you want to have the United States in the room. With Egypt, you want to have the United States in the room, meaning those are the ones that Egypt and Qatar are the ones who can impact Hamas. Egypt via the border, Qatar, because all of the leaders of Hamas outside are in Qatar. But to impact Qatar and Hamas, you want to have the United States. And the United States has been there from day one. Incredible involvement of the administration, of the security apparatus. It's like that's part of that whole thing. How do you walk in and do this? How do you get the people into the room? And sometimes it's harder, and it's hard the whole time. So those are the main stakeholders. There are additional ones that impact the negotiations at every stage along the way. Additional Palestinians, it's not just Hamas. I think we kind of forget that. There's another organization called Islamic Jihad. The full name is Palestinian Islamic Jihad. They hold some of the hostages in the Gaza Strip. They were part of the attack on October 7th. Who impacts them? Not Qatar, not Egypt. Everybody breathe in deep. They are a proxy of Iran. Totally and absolutely. They were established, inspired by the Islamic Revolution in Iran after 1979. Their first, the first one who established it, and then as they went on, they totally, all of their leadership sits in Tehran. So how do you bring them into the room? Okay, you're talking to Hamas or to Hamas talking also to Islamic Jihad. So there's a lot of different stakeholders, which makes it, as I said, the devil's in the details because you have to get to the stage where you get to an agreement with Hamas and Islamic Jihad says, no, we're not going to be on board. Most of us have not noticed, by the way, that there are constantly things coming out, both from Hamas and from Islamic Jihad. And I have to tell you that after the attack of October 7th, which was a terror attack, which is it's unprecedented any time before in the amount of hostages, and I don't like using the word diversity, but in the you take a 9-month baby and an 84-year-old Holocaust survivor. It's just like when you think about what they took, and some of them were just taken by people from the Gaza Strip. Meaning, I don't even know if all of the hostages are held by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So you have to have that additional aspect of stakeholders of somebody being sure that they actually have the whole list. So these sort of things are going to be done by a security element that works together all of the time in Israel. You have the intelligence side of us trying to find out information that we can. And you want to also find out about the stakeholders to make sure that they're not, selling you incorrect information is the way I would put that.
Yeah, and on that note, can you shine a little light on how the hostage release and the prisoner exchange, how is this coordinated? Because as you said, if there are hostages held by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and maybe just a random person, how are they coordinating? We saw that video of the 3 women being passed over to the Red Cross surrounded by fighters.
So first of all, I want to remind everybody what we know, that Hamas is not just a terror organization, it's a terror army. And that's the whole thing. When they show up with the hostages, they show themselves as an army. They want to show themselves in the uniform. But from day one, October 7th, after they attacked Israel, for the next 472 days, they were wearing civvies like you and me because they want to blend into the civilian population because they're a terror army. They're not an army. And I say that the negotiations and the way you do that kind of coordination is that Hamas has its own type of control. It is an organization that has been built in a semi-hierarchical manner. From 2007, that's a long time ago. That's, 14, 15 years ago. They've ruled over more. They've ruled over the Gaza Strip. They've built a whole system. And I say with the challenges that we do have on how you fight the terror army, you still have the elements that run it. And so what's happening is the Hamas leaders in Qatar, I'm pointing as if it's over there, but the Hamas leaders in Qatar are going to be talking to the Hamas leaders in the Gaza Strip, and every person has a replacement. So Yahya Sinwar has a replacement, probably his brother Mohammed Sinwar, Mohammed Def will have a replacement, and they're the ones who are supposed to have all of that information. They did the attack on October 7th on purpose in a way where the hostages are all over the place to make it impossible and hard and for them easier to hide them for that entire time. So they have to figure that out. And I'm just going to say from my own personal perspective as an expert, I'm not sure that they know where all the hostages are. I'm not sure that they know to give us the information about all 94. And that's one of the reasons that the negotiation takes so long is about the 33 that we demanded now in stage 1. I'm not sure that they know. Okay, meaning they're going to pull it out, the 3 that they know, and then the next 3 that they know, and then the next 3 that they know. And what if, because what happened the last time also is at a certain stage along the way, when it stopped, the question was it stopping because of the ceasefire stopping or because they didn't actually know? And Sarah, it's a horrible thing, but they may not know. So how does that work? As I said, the one talks to the other. We talk to the Qataris, to the Egyptians, to the Americans, and everybody, as it passes along, everybody follows each other. And I don't think that they have full information in the Gaza Strip about all of the hostages, but that's my own personal assessment.
Thank you. Yeah, it's horrifying, and we're working. We have hope. We put hope in the title of this webinar, but there's so much uncertainty as well. I want to shift a little bit and ask you a very big question, which is how is Israeli society responding to this agreement?
Wow, it's first of all, I wish you could all be here right now, because in its own way, this last year and 4 months are such a horror story. And there's a lot of bravery and there's a lot of resilience, but none of us have really been able to mourn. And I think that what happens, and that also happened when some hostages were rescued. It certainly happened in 2023, in November of 2023, when after the first couple months, we had a series of women and children who were returned from captivity after those few months there. And now we're already after 472, almost 473 days. So first of all, I kid you not, we all tell each other to breathe. It's hard to breathe. The reason it's hard to breathe is because, oh my God, did you see those 3 brave women? Can we imagine what they've been through? I don't even want to think about that. And Romy, the 3 of them, I mean, they were a 24-year-old, a 20-year-old, and a 31-year-old. Just, I'm talking to people in the audience right now. Is it the age of your daughter, of your sister, of your granddaughter? I just think about that. I have a 24-year-old girl. And a 24-year-old girl came home yesterday after a year, after 471 days. She came home to her mother. So it's hard to breathe. It's hard to breathe because that was 3. And there's another 94. And of the 94, as I said, over 30, we know are declared dead. That doesn't make it easy, but we know are declared dead. But there's such uncertainty. Romy Gonen specifically, there was no information from her from the minute that she was taken hostage. Emily and Dawn also in that sense, it's like you didn't know for the last 470, are they alive? Are they dead? What happened to them? So we're all trying to breathe. We all feel not relief. It's like a joy, a hurting joy. We're so happy for them, for us, for the families. And we so dread that next stage. It's like on Saturday, like we're going to wait until they say the names. And when they say the names, we're going to go, wow. And then when they get there, it's that dread. Are they going to bring in somebody alive? Are they going to bring somebody dead? It's such a hard situation, but I have to say that for the first time on Sunday, which is the day that the 3 young women were released, was the first day that you could hear at least a sense of a little bit of a smile. Not joy. This isn't about joy. It's relief and hope. It's absolutely hope that this event will be over. So I gave it at length, but it's a very strong sense right now inside Israel.
Yeah, and we've also seen mixed reactions. In fact, we've seen from some in the government, but also there was a large counter protest in Jerusalem before the hostage release, opposition to this agreement. And can you help unpack and help us understand why there is opposition to this agreement in Israel?
So the 2 aims that were put on the table by the government at the beginning of the war, and they were both put there from the beginning of the war, was A, bring back the hostages, and B, defeat Hamas. And I think that all of us will agree that none of us feel that we've defeated Hamas. I want to say, as a military person, as somebody who follows terrorism, that I feel that we've done exceedingly harsh damage to the terror army. But Hamas is also a social movement, and Hamas is part of the Palestinian world. And so you certainly don't feel like you defeated them. And the question was, so how can you go through with this when you're releasing the same type of terrorists that are the ones that did the attack on October 7th? And everybody remembers and knows in Israel that the last time that we did this type of an exchange, which was in 2011, one of the terrorists that was let out, amongst others, was a man that I didn't sit Shiva for, called JCRC-NY when he was killed by Israel on October 16th. But he had been in Israeli jails, and he had been there until October of 2011. He was let out in that release of October 2011. And you go, who are you releasing now when you're doing that in exchange for the hostages? I have to say that the voices who are opposed to a hostage exchange, they may be loud, but they are not at all in any way indicative of Israel. And I'm going to say something very odd in the hopeful way. You're in the United States right now. You may have noticed you're slightly polarized. That's me being cynical to the lovely audience. And I say that not to be mean about it, but we have different voices in Israel, and that's part of democracy. Different voices, different opinions. And when it comes to letting hardcore terrorists out of jail, That's a hard thing to do. It's like, I want the hostages to come and I cringe at what we've let out. I need the hostages to be here because it's an open scar. But you do realize that what's happening right now is the reestablishment of Hamas. And that balancing act is a very hard one to take.
Yeah, I think you put that very beautifully. Another group in Israeli society that must be feeling a lot of mixed emotions right now are the hostage families for hostages who are not set to be released in this first stage, especially those parents and families of male soldiers who we know will be sort of the last stage of released hostages. Can you talk to us a little bit about how they're reacting to the current agreement?
So one of the ways that it was is everybody said, so do an agreement, do it for all 94 at once. So I need to be clear that there was no stage along the way that on the table was all 94. I mean, at the time it was 98 or 100, whatever the number was, and that it would all end. And I say that because of everything that I was talking about before. You're negotiating with Hamas. Okay, it's me, Miri. I'm not exactly not far right, far left. Okay, I'm very middle of the road, and I look at things in the eyes. And for the last 470 days, people kept saying, Miri, you're so doomsday. We don't want to talk to you. Because I don't believe Hamas. I don't believe them at this stage, Sarah. I don't believe them in the 42 days with the 33 people. I'm the one who keeps saying, remember, they're going to send back bodies in the 33, and we're not expecting bodies in the 33, because that's how Hamas played the terror psychology. And I say that because for the families who, it's like, how can you make that kind of decision that you're going to bring back some of them, but not all of them? And I say, and the flip side of that is, so do you want to wait another year? I mean, what are you going to get to be able to do all of them at once? And it's a question that we also asked last May. And as I said, there is a stage where it was like, okay, now we can do it. So there's nothing easy to say, and my heart goes out to every single one of every family. And I don't want to argue. I don't want to have a negotiation. My heart goes out to them. And I say, there is no nice way to do this kind of thing. And so for me, I want to say 42 days, 33, and immediately after that, at least the other 30 that we hope are alive, maybe 35 that are, again, we don't know the numbers. But I understand them completely. There's one family that, at least as of now, it's two brothers who were taken, and because of the age, and I think that one of them was wounded, one of the brothers is on the list for the 33 and the other is not. And having said that, I breathe in deep and say, let's get back 33. And then let's get back more, because we're dealing with Hamas. We're not dealing with somebody who took them prisoner for ransom. They didn't kidnap them to make money. They took them as bargaining chips. And I want to hold in front of everybody into the eyes, they're such horrific devils, as far as I'm concerned, the Hamas, that these bargaining chips for them as they look at the hostages are worth just as much dead as alive. And because of that, at the end, you have to breathe in deep and go forward the way that we can with them. There is no easy way to go forward otherwise. And again, I'm like, I can't imagine what it's like for the parents.
Yeah, shifting gears once again, I know you can feel free to tell me this isn't your area of expertise, but we're talking about the Israeli reactions. Can you share with us what your reaction has been amongst Palestinians? And I think we could talk about Palestinians in Gaza and also Palestinians in the West Bank.
So I'm going to step back and say that one of the big gaps, it's not a gap, it's a chasm, it's just inconceivable, is in the way that we look at the war. When you ask that question, it's kind of like, how do we look at the war? Sarah, they look at the war in a completely different way. And when I say completely different way, all of us need to be aware how much we are in our own echo box. Israel, in the last 15 months, most definitely has turned the Gaza Strip into a place that is very hard to live in. And that's me being Israeli cynical, okay? We've destroyed a large amount of the Gaza Strip itself physically. The Israeli Defense Forces have targeted the terror army and the terror army that sits within the civilians in that sense. And we've never targeted civilians, but we have killed a lot of civilians. So when you say their reaction, for them, it's the double aspect, because I watch both levels. Hamas wants to say that it's all about victory. We won. We're Hamas. They're going to show it. They want us to see that. That's why they wanted to show both the views of Sunday in the exchange. And they'll do that time after time. They want to show us, see, we're here, we're ruling, you didn't vanquish us. That for them is very important. And that for the younger generation in the Palestinian world, it means those are the ones that they are going to revere. But to me, it's worse, because Yahya Sinwar is the man of the year in the Arab youth survey of 2024. Yahya Sinwar, can you imagine a bigger gap than taking what is, for me, the evil producer of the most genocidal planned attack against Israelis? Okay, it's inconceivable that they sat and planned that attack, and he is the man of the year. So what are they seeing right now? For them, victory. For them, it's meeting the reality of the Gaza Strip, which is a very harsh one right now. But this is not about, yay, the war is over, everything's going to be better. And I'm swallowing deep, and I say that because I don't think that the voices right now, I think they're more extreme on both sides, and we all have to get past it a bit before we can hope for some kind of moderation in the voices.
Thank you. Those of us who have been glued to the news have seen that there is certainly not a unity view of this agreement within the Israeli government. We've seen Netanyahu's coalition be threatened with resignations. Can you talk to us a little bit about the impact this agreement has had on Netanyahu's coalition and on the Israeli government as a whole?
So the government itself was and is very stable. It's based both on the parties that initially were in it when the Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. And at that stage, it was what we call in Israeli terms, the 64-56. We're 120 Knesset members. We have a different system than in the United States, and we don't vote for the president or the prime minister separately. We vote for parties, and then the parties put together the coalition government. And that 64-56 was very strong. Now, and then it was strengthened by some parties that came in during the war and left and came back in. And I'm saying that now because one party has left because of the ceasefire, the one that's called the Jewish Power, under former, because the resignation went into effect today, former Minister of National Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, very far right, pretty well known in that sense, because his voice was a voice that everybody liked to echo a lot because it was a very extreme voice. His party resigned. His party is five. It depends, because there's 5 Knesset seats. It means that the prime minister still has an absolute majority of 61, 62 to 57, 58, because Itamar Ben-Gvir, being in the opposition, is not going to vote against the government. He just doesn't want to. He said he didn't want to be they didn't want to be part of the government itself. So I don't want to say this is good news, bad news, different people, different opinions in that sense. But the prime minister still has a very strong coalition. The resignation of Itamar Ben-Gvir, from my perspective, I say as an Israeli right now, I view his party as being exceedingly extreme, off the top, totally taking everybody out to a place that we shouldn't have been in the first place. So I personally am happy that they are not part of the government anymore, but it doesn't mean that the government falls apart, meaning we only have elections at the end of 2026. That's the scheduled elections of the state of Israel in November of 2026. That's another, year and a half from now. So the big event that happened in that sense in the last, for those who have been following in today's Israeli news, is that the Israeli chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, who's been the chief of staff since the beginning of 2023, he announced that he was going to end his position in March. And that will have ramifications domestically, politically, with the government right now, because he made a very clear-cut statement today to the camera in the sense that I'm resigning, I'm responsible, and there should be a government commission, or more correctly, a Knesset commission, that independently now looks and sees the colossal failure of October 7th.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll move to Q&A. We have a lot of Q&A. We want a lot of questions from the audience. We won't be able to get to all of them, but I want to ask you, we have a new president as of yesterday here in the United States. What role do you expect the U.S. to play as this phase and then hopefully subsequent phases unfold?
First of all, I expect them to play a role. And I say that because I think that people need to, that meaning I don't expect the United States of America under this administration or the former administration to be isolationist and not part of what's going on. And I say that because it's not a given. There could be a choice to step back and not be as involved as in the past. And I do think that the United States has an important role in both us, in backing, in our need both of a relationship with our most important strategic ally. But to be more specific, I just described 42 days. We're on day number 2.5 of the 42 days, okay? You have to continue to have the kind of negotiating mediator. Qatar, Egypt, remember all of that description? You need to continue to have that. It isn't something that just happens. The devil is in the details, and we're still in it. We need that participation, and that's something that the administration, I hope, will continue to do as it's been done until now. In addition, and these are other things that we could talk on a different webinar, very earthquake in the sense of an enormous change. Enormous changes have happened in the Middle East in 2025. The events that happened in Syria at the end of 2024, December 8th, and the fall of the Assad regime, 54 years of a dictatorship, the father and then the son. These have ramifications in all of our area. And also in those areas, you're going to see American involvement. The changes, somebody has to rebuild the Gaza Strip. Where does that money come from? Is it Europe? Is it the United States? I don't see them doing it. Is it Saudi Arabia? Is it Qatar? Why will they do that? These are all things where the United States has a lot of impact. And we haven't spoken about it here, but Lebanon at the same time. Southern Lebanon needs to be rebuilt. Beirut, they're all looking for it. How do you make sure that Iran doesn't step back in to at least the position that they had in Lebanon? So these are all things where the United States can have, the administration can have a lot of impact.
Thank you. We're going to move to questions from the audience. We have a lot of questions. Thank you all. We have over 500 people on our webinar today. And so I'm really so appreciative, Miri, that you were able to make the time. There's obviously an incredible amount of interest. Our first question is from Sherry Brown. They want to know, how will the released prisoners, Palestinian prisoners, be monitored? What are the expectations that the released prisoners will attack Israel and Israelis again?
So one of the things that was defined within that is that Israel said because it depends where they were arrested. Some of these prisoners are from different attacks and events that were both in Judea and Samaria and the West Bank, some in the past. So remember, the Gaza Strip until October 7th, 2023, from 2007, okay, for such a long time, was under Hamas. We didn't have a lot of prisoners from the Gaza Strip. So one of the definitions that Israel defined is that we won't allow them to go back into the West Bank. We're sending them to the Gaza Strip. There's a whole bulk that we said not into the Gaza Strip and not into the West Bank, but that other countries would accept them. That's the devil in the details. You have to find those other countries who will accept them. What are the conditions for how many years is that? And those are all things that are being decided. The biggest challenge was with the term in Israel, and I'm apologizing to the audience because I know that I both speak fast and I use all these terms. This is from Hebrew, and it's a political term, but it's used in the justice world because it's called terrorists who have blood on their hands. Okay, it's a very Israeli term. It means the terrorists who actually committed the act, because there's lots of aiding and abetting. How's that for terms, okay? The ones that have blood on the hands, the ones that, I'm giving the example, okay? It's like you have people in Israel who woke up and discovered that the murderers of a couple, in their bed, of somebody, different terror attacks all over Israel where you arrested the terrorist afterwards, and they're in Israeli jail with life sentences, and they're going to be released now. These are terrorists with blood on their hands that we can't abide to have them go back home to their homes in the West Bank or to the Gaza Strip. And so those ones, there's a whole, Again, I don't know who's going to uphold it, but that's part of the devil in the details and the mediators and arriving at a resolution. And so all of that is going on behind the scenes as we speak right now.
Thank you. Part of the agreement with the ceasefire, of course, was that Israel would send in more aid to Gaza. And Chaim Steinberger wants to know, will Hamas control the aid being sent to Gaza? Is there a third-party monitor to make sure that that the aid is going to Gazans who need it and that Hamas is not confiscating and selling it for its own profit?
So first of all, thanks for the question. And I want to make 2 points on that one. Yes, Hamas is the one who will control it. One of the biggest challenges it's been from the beginning of the war is that the government itself has consistently said it won't be Hamas, and has not approved of any other alternative. Because I want to be clear, there are no happily ever after nice alternatives who think that Zionism is a good idea. And I'm sorry for being so cynical about it, because the challenge of who's going to be in the Gaza Strip right now, none of us trust anything. And that there was lots of aid that when it went in kind of got lost, as mentioned before, taken by Hamas, sold by Hamas. The chaos doesn't help anybody. So yes, Hamas is going to control it, which is why Hamas right now can show itself as being the one in control. The aid right now is coming in mainly from Egypt. That started from Sunday. That was part of the conditions of the ceasefire itself, is both the opening up of the south to the north, but also of allowing in more. But I want to, the second point that I wanted to make, it's very important to me, to this audience, okay? We never stopped aid. We never stopped aid. Please don't bite in to what to me is really erroneous, meaning we allowed in, just like the Egyptians are allowing in, but we allowed in aid all of the time. The problem is, as soon as the aid went in, there was nobody to take it. And that was true. The reason that now it as if looks like, oh, it's going in and it's all organized, is because we're in a ceasefire, because we're trying to get back our hostages. And that's all part of the manipulation of what Hamas wants to do. It's very challenging because we never stopped the aid. We never didn't want the aid to arrive there. And the question was always that, so why don't we facilitate that? Because we didn't reconquer all of the Gaza Strip. And so there is no easy way out. I do think that the Israeli government has to, at some stage along the way, agree to some kind of a presence of a different party. I don't think it's going to be a third party, meaning outside. I do think that there are, Palestinian Authority makes everybody go, what? But I'm like, you have other options? We don't want it to be us. We don't want it to be Hamas. There is no happily ever after. You're going to look for the less worse one, either Palestinians, Palestinian Authority. I literally can think of no outside party, not Qatar, not the Emirates. There is no Arab country that wants to come and be in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah. There were several questions about the day after plan, so I'm happy that you addressed that as well. Paul Levine wants to know, he says, I've heard many conflicting theories on whether the IDF will withdraw from the Philadelphia corridor. What is your best understanding?
It's a wonderful question, and I don't know. Because I'm going to give my personal opinion, okay? I don't think it's the most important thing, but that's me, Miri. I'm allowed to have an opinion, okay? I think that we can, just like we did in 2005, and I don't think that everything that happened in the Gaza Strip is because we left the Philadelphia corridor. That's me as I look at it. It's not because of the smuggling in Egypt and all those. It's a lot of other issues as well. And so being there was very important at the stage that they were doing it of the war. Staying there is a different issue. Egypt is on the other side. The 2.3 million or so Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have to have some kind of future. And for that, they kind of need to have that border with Egypt. And if we're on that border with Egypt, it doesn't work that way. So I don't think we have to stay there. I can give you lots of other military people like myself who think that the most important thing is that we are there. So there's conflicting ideas on that one.
Thank you. We have a question from one attendee about there's differing views whether the success of this agreement being reached now should be attributed to President Trump or President Biden. What is your sense on coup? Was it both together? How did we reach this with the election and the transfer of power?
So when I said the devil is in that we've been negotiating, as I said, through mediators in different ways throughout. Everybody's been trying to look for a way. Better relations, less better relations. I don't think, I mean, remember the elections themselves were in November. It isn't that immediately after that you already had then a special envoy that was going on and in. When you arrive at the end agreement, yes, January 19th, 20th, has to do with the inauguration. I think that there's an impetus in the Middle East right now that you do not understand and feel in the United States of America that has to do with the return of President Trump. President Trump in the Middle East is not viewed in the same way that you may view him in the United States in that sense. And I say that because that adds in impetus, both to the Israeli government, but certainly because everybody's always looking at the impact on the Israeli government. I'm like, it's actually an impetus that impacts Egypt and the terrorist organizations in Qatar, just because he could decide that he's not going to give any more assistance to Egypt, as an example. These are decisions that this president could do that you don't expect from other presidents. And so that would have made it more, but all of the details of everything I said, that build up to get to that, to be able to implement that, all of that was done before.
Thank you. Norman Levin wants to understand what happened with the International Red Cross. Why were they unable to visit hostages? Are they going to be held accountable for inaction?
I don't want to go send you all to do homework, but the International Red Cross can only do what it's asked to do by both sides. So the fact that we can, they're not accountable. They're not to be blamed. Okay. They approached and asked Hamas, and Hamas wouldn't let them in. And you're going, why didn't they let them in? Like, Hamas ignored the International Red Cross. So I can hold them as that, because at the end they are a facilitator. And they don't usually go at all to places where it's like this, where it's terror organization. Okay. And I just say that because I've followed them for the last 100. I mean, they were established, God, I'm trying to remember, end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century. And they're not the problem. Okay. I may not like them, but they're not the problem. I have much more to say about the United Nations Relief and Welfare Agency for the Palestinian refugees, which is known as UNRWA, which was established by the United Nations in 1950. And in their involvement than I do with the International Red Cross. Because at the end, the International Red Cross, they are allowed in and they are allowed out and they are a facilitator. I don't blame them per se.
Thank you. Gail Port, actually, this is a good segue from what you just said. Gail Port wants to know what, if any, role does or will the UN play in ceasefire negotiations or future governance or monitoring?
Wow. So UNRWA exists, and the United Nations is not about to cancel it. I do think that in that sense, the change of administration will, I mean, that is something that I always saw. You could see much more the extreme difference in US administrations between the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration. Now it's going to be the Trump administration when it came to the UN. And in that sense, because I imagine that the United States, again, will probably not fund different organizations in that sense, so that there will be changes. I just want to say that I'm not a fan of UNRWA. Very few Israelis are. I also want to say that if you cut UNRWA off cold turkey, somebody else has to do what they did. And I'm just saying that because they'll invent something else. And they, the United Nations, they, the world, I don't know what that means. It's hard to look right now at the 2.3 million people in the Gaza Strip and not realize how much they are victims. They may hate me and want me to die and think I don't have a right to exist, but I can still look and say they are victims. And 80% of that population was held by UNRWA until October 7th, 2023, so that they were a fact there. And I don't know how that will change because the international community in this war specifically went down a path that is impossible for me as an Israeli, where I'm being blamed for October 7th. I'm being blamed I'm being blamed for everything, and that the international community is doing. So I don't know where that one's going to go. The change of administration, I think, in that sense, is actually going to impact it more.
Thank you. Robert Ray wants to know, is the Israeli political and military establishment still committed to eradicating Hamas as a political and military force in Gaza and the West Bank?
The military was always on board on the aspect of eradicating the military capability. And when we say eradicating, you never erase it. It's a terror army. I said that at the beginning. That terror army means that it uses terror tactics, but it also builds itself as an army, and it's very difficult to address. We have degraded it. We haven't eradicated it, again, as a terror army. But as a social movement and as a political movement, sorry to tell you all, but you cannot eradicate a social or political movement, not by military action. I'll even say not by outside action. If there are people there who want to support it, there are going to be people there who are going to want to support it. Hamas is not just in the Gaza Strip, it's also very strong in the West Bank. It's not just in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, it's in the Palestinian diaspora, if I can call that, both in Lebanon and in other places. So I breathe in deep and go, okay, there's an organization that calls for my destruction, my annihilation, and I need to understand what to do with it. But you can't make it go away because it calls for my annihilation. I say, sadly, the world could do a lot better in that sense in sidelining Hamas and in just calling out the voices, because Hamas has not really gotten any flack, as far as I'm concerned, for what they did on October 7th and what they've done every single day since. So I'm with you. I want to eradicate it. I don't think you can this way at all.
Connected to that, we had another question about whether you had a sense of how degraded the Hamas military is. Do we have a sense of how many fighters are left? What percentage of the tunnels are still standing?
I don't have good news for you. Part of the way that Hamas built both its attack plan, the October 7th attack plan, that JCRC-NY, somebody actually sat and planned all of those atrocities. That was part of the terror attack because it immobilizes us, it terrorizes us, it frightens us. And look at us in January 2025, how effective that attack plan was with the hostages. That's the plan. But part of that plan is also what I call their defense plan. And their defense plan is both the underground capabilities, being inside the civilian areas, the taking of the hostages themselves. That's part of their defense. It's both a bargaining chip, but it's also part of their defense. They had hundreds of kilometers of the underground capabilities. That means that now they have hundreds less, but they still have. That's what gave them mobility and protection and enabled them to go back and forth. And you literally have to sever every portion of it. And they built that for over 20 years. That's a very long time. So yes, they still have the capability. When it comes to the amount of fighters, today, on the day that the Israeli chief of staff announced a few hours ago that he was going to end his position, resign at the beginning of March, and he stated literally in the last hour that Israel has killed 20,000 Hamas fighters in the Gaza Strip, in the fighting over the last 15 months. So add on to that we targeted and killed the terrorists, and we inadvertently killed an enormous amount of civilians as they were inside the civilian community, even if we told them to go away. I will say that the impetus to attack on October 7th was a hatred and a dehumanizing of Israel to a degree that I cannot understand. And the last 15 months have not made a generation that thinks that we're the good guys. And I apologize for being cynical, meaning I think that they have no problem to recruit after what we did. But I want to remind everybody they had no problem to recruit and enact the October 7th attack. So it isn't that because of what we just did in the last 15 months, they're suddenly on board with Hamas. So they started out with around 30,000 fighters. We say that we killed in and around 20,000. I would say that they absolutely have 30,000 fighters now because they have new ones who joined in. They don't have the weaponry. They don't have the capabilities, and we've destroyed an enormous amount of where their different locations were. Sadly, they put their locations in mosques, hospitals, schools, underground, inside all of the urban civilian communities. And that's what the Gaza Strip looks like right now.
Thank you. I want our last question. If anyone watching right now listens to the Ezra Klein show podcast, they know that he ends every interview asking the person he's speaking with to suggest 3 books they'd recommend to the audience. And we have a question here from our audience. Looking at the bookshelf behind you, what books would you suggest for further reading to understand the conflict? And also another question of how people can follow your work.
Wow. Okay. So when it comes to books, I'm really challenged by that. As you can see in that sense, I read and I teach, and so I try to go out of my echo box. So rather than say specifically books to read, I am challenging every single person here to read something that they disagree with. And that means if you're a Democrat, read something that you disagree with on the Republican side, and vice versa. And I say to myself, I sit and read Hamas. I call it propaganda, but I read it, and I read Palestinian. That's not the same as Hamas, but I read all of those. Are both books in English behind me, but additional ones. I recommend in that sense leaving the echo box. It's very difficult nowadays because we all follow it in media, online, and in social media. And the way that it works there is you usually only see the other opinion when it's framed as something terrible. And I want you to step back, breathe in deep. There are more than just 2 sides to this conflict. I'm very aware of that. I don't think I'm going to get along and hug the other side, but if I don't understand it, I'm not going to be able to go forward. And that's the best I can do in that sense. As I say, I read and listen. I'm specifically me, Miri. I'm an addict to the New Press, to Barry Weiss's stuff. I just found her to be a very refreshing voice for me over the last year on viewing different things. It opened up a lot of things, but again, it's about balance and opening up and getting out of your echo box.
That's very, very wise advice to read the Free Press, listen to Ezra Klein, and everything on both sides and in between. Thank you so much. This was incredibly, incredibly educational. I learned a lot. I know that everyone here, the hundreds of you who joined us, did. So thank all of you for joining. Thank you to UJA for their support. There were a bunch of questions. We will make this recording accessible online so that you can watch it again and share it. And Miri, thank you. If we need to call you up again, we know that there's an audience that wants to hear from you.
I'm so really honored to have said that. And if I haven't been clear, I am hopeful we're going to go forward and we're going to get past this. And the only way we can do that is together. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.